Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We proceed now to the second assembly of the day titled Casablanca Art School Intimate Memories and Contemporary Legacies. And it's a pleasure to welcome the film director Mujah Maraini-Melehi in conversation with the curator, publisher, and art historian Morad Montazami. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Do you think we can play the PowerPoint? Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Morad Montazami. I'm the director of Zama Books and Curating platform, which curated the Casablanca Art School exhibition at Hamriya Studios. And I'm very thankful to Sharjah Art Foundation and to the African Institute for having us for the exhibition and also for this talk. Again, very happy to be with you all. We are pleased today to have two daughters of Mohammed Melehi with us, and especially Mujah Maraini-Melehi, who will be joining me on stage after this introduction. And I thank her for being here. And after this short introduction, we will also have the pleasure to be in dialogue with Mujah, who is therefore the daughter of Tony Maraini and Mohammed Melehi, two essential protagonists of the Casablanca Art School. And we will also have the chance, of course, to discuss with you if you have any questions at the end. So the title of the exhibition, Casablanca Art School, Platforms and Patterns for a Post-Colonial Avant-Garde, 1962-1987, we propose this concept of platforms and patterns as a way of thinking about the history of a collective, accordingly with the topic of the March meeting, and we're very happy for this interaction. It's exactly at that point when I remember also the conference of Rax Media Collective 2 days ago, about defining the collective, because the Casablanca Art School, and that's a point that we try to make in the exhibition, was neither a group nor a movement, strictly speaking. They didn't have one manifesto. They issued several manifestos at several different moments of time, again between the 60s and the 80s, and they were also a variable number of protagonists. They could be 3 of them in one exhibition, 6 of them in another international exhibition, or 12 of them at the Baghdad Biennale when they represented Morocco in 1974. So here, for example, it's the first solo show of Mohammed Melehi when he's back from the US to Casablanca to become a teacher at the Casablanca Art School, inspired by Farid Belkahia, who became one of the first Moroccan director of this previously colonial and French-minded school for this new chapter or post-colonial golden age. And this exhibition of Mohammed Melehi in 1965, which you see here, was taken place in a heritage building, which was not an exhibition gallery at all, and especially not a white cube, as you can see. It's the Bab Ruha Palace in Rabat, which is very famous and began to be used as an exhibition space in the rehabilitation or preservation of heritage building, which was one of the very early ideas of Mohammed Melehi, who continued to create those platforms. For example, as we know today, even the Sharjah Biennale, of course, does a lot in terms of reappropriating heritage buildings in the context of contemporary art. So it's interesting, obviously, that Mohammed Melehi was thinking of this concept as early as 1965. And even the way the paintings are displayed, as you can see on these kinds of makeshift panels that will be used later on as well for their outdoor exhibitions. So again, when we speak about a platform, it can be an exhibition or a journal or a public manifestation. And this is one of the best examples, I guess, because it's also through this photograph in which you can actually see also Tony Maraini, Mujah's daughter, sitting on a desk on the top left image. is not only to create a makeshift platform to create exhibition spaces in the absence of artistic and museum infrastructures in post-colonial Morocco, but it's also to create an audience. How do you create an audience? How do you generate a genuine audience who at that time was not familiar with ideas of radical abstraction or geometric abstraction? And the whole Casablanca Art School teaching staff of that golden age and period, again with Mohamed Melehi as one of the most active of them, was also in a way to make them understand, either Moroccan society or their students, that ideas like radical abstraction or geometric abstraction were not necessarily Western driven, and that you could find in your own roots, in your own local language, even as far as the pre-Islamic iconography of Amazigh rugs and carpets, you could find patterns. That's why we talk about patterns, to make your own definition of something radical, something geometric, something modern, out of a Western context, or at least in dialogue between East and West. So these images, for example, are the most early examples of some of the students who began to experiment with these ideas and style as a transition, because they were still educated also in a fine art context, and previously with a more easel painting and nude model, as you can see behind this student whose name is Ali Nouri, and is also represented in the exhibition at Hamria Studios. Mohamed Melehi also introduced experimental painting, action painting, deconstructing the model of easel painting by taking the students outdoor on the rooftop of the school, mixing collage, media with painting. He also opened a photography studio in the Casablanca Art School at that point in the mid-60s. You also had Mohamed Sheba, very much involved with the idea of creating new patterns, and mainly dealing with graphic design, poster making, as well as neo-calligraphic scriptures inspired by Kufic calligraphy, but modernized or transformed in a contemporary shape. And that was very important because they were also creating logos and font, either Arabic font or Latin font, which they were commissioned by, street shops and different advertisings in magazines in Morocco at that time. So there was this clear idea to get out of the school, not to keep the school as a closed space, but to be able to use the school as a hub that can produce extensions and ramifications through advertising, through graphic design, and even through their painting, which they would eventually exhibit in the public space. And right before we look at these landmark public space exhibitions, let's have a quick look at this amazing photograph taken by Melehi, again in the mid-60s in Casablanca, where the drugstores and the street shops begin to decorate themselves. It's not Melehi or the Casablanca Art School, it's their influence that infusing in the city will see some of the drugstores and street shops literally begin to decorate and to paint their own patterns and decorations on the facade of their drugstores, which Melehi took in photograph as a way of showing how creativity is something alive, and creativity can be something shared within society in a kind of grassroots pattern networking in a way, or pattern circulation. These photographs, again, taken by Mohamed Melehi, who was also very much active with Tony Maraini and Bert Flint in documenting Amazigh arts, or maybe we should say Afro-Amazigh arts, because sometimes people consider Amazigh and Berber tradition as limited to North Africa, whereas Tony Maraini and Bert Flint demonstrated that through all the Saharan belt, Mauritania, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, you can find the same patterns, the same traditional technique and use of material, either in jewels or carpet making. And these are some of the carpets and rugs that were a landmark influence for the school protagonist. Some of them published on their journals like Maghrebar or Integral, which you can see in the exhibition in Hamria Studios. And maybe most importantly, the painted ceilings. An impressive and fabulous collections of painted ceilings from very small and popular mosques of the High Atlas and the Sousse, where you could have sometimes even only 2 or 3 worshippers who were the same craftsmen and women working on these incredible painted ceilings that reminded so much of Paul Klee and Kandinsky and created this reversal of defining modernity, because obviously these craftsmen didn't know about Paul Klee and Kandinsky, but were still able to produce these outstanding patterns and almost symphonic colors and patterns that were clearly challenging the idea of abstract art or even modernism being something only Western. These photographs also show how Tony Maraini, Bert Flint, and Mohamed Melehi traveled in the fieldwork approach in the High Atlas and other regions where they met with the local people who produced these arts and crafts and tried to also pay tribute to them in all the accounts and reportage and journals in which they published about their fieldwork research. And the landmark 1969 Jama Efna Square and also Casablanca Square outdoor exhibition of Jama Efna Square, as most of you probably know about, and became a kind of landmark by now for Global South modernism. And here we can also see that the kind of provocative gesture to show their artworks outdoor and to create an unexpected outdoor exhibition space out of nowhere, but on the most important and lively and touristic square of Marrakesh, was also about creating infrastructure, even temporary infrastructure. But the artist at that time is not only someone who creates artworks. The artist is also someone who thinks collectively about temporary infrastructures or provisional infrastructures for showing a kind of art that was a backlash to the status quo of colonialism, even after independence, where most of the Moroccan artists were described as naive and folk painters in the salon exhibitions that continued even after independence. So these are some of the photos of this landmark outdoor exhibition during day and during evening. The concept they talked about was plastic presence, the title of these outdoor exhibitions, and it tells everything. Plastic presence. It means that not only the public space influenced the artwork, but the artwork influenced the public space, almost to the point that you could consider the skin of the city as changing, being recolored by the artworks and by how these patterns circulating throughout the city will change the skin of the city. Other semi-public spaces like Girls' High School, they brought their concept of the plastic presence exhibition in these high schools in Casablanca by the beginning of the 70s, and therefore showing the importance of interacting with the youth and trying to feed and trying to generate a younger audience and younger consciousness of post-colonial possibilities and post-colonial potential for young artists or young graphic designers or young future curators even. And this is another landmark of the 1968 student annual exhibition, which is a kind of climax of the deconstructing the hierarchy between the teachers and the students, because there is a kind of fusion of Melehi and Sheba's influence with the students also working beyond their own field or scope and creating something collective between the teachers and the students, as you can see, very much creative and advanced in terms of turning the gallery of the school into a total artwork or a kind of Bauhaus arts and craft and fine arts and experimental arts coming together. And the Bauhaus was an influence because they all studied the ideas from the Bauhaus before returning to Morocco. a few more photos. And to end this introduction, the famous Asila Festival, co-founded in 1978 by Mohammed Ben Aissa and Mohamed Melehi, and with an important role of Tony Maraini as well in the idea and invention of the Asila Festival, which will become one of the most important late tricontinental platform about murals. Not only murals, but again, this idea of outdoor exhibition or even open air museum would happen once a year, every summer in Asila. Even to this day, while we are speaking, the festival continues. And again, most of them being related to the Casablanca Art School network came in '78 and the years after to produce these murals, but not by themselves, also involving the children and the women of Asila in a genuine community art making that became a landmark because they invited Etel Adnan, they invited Mona Saoudi, Mohamed Omar Khalil, Dia Azawi, and so many other artists, Carla Accardi, and many other artists, either from the third world or from the south of Europe in a way. And again, challenging the definition of a collective, strictly speaking, because they're not a group, they're not a movement, they're more like a constellation, which is movable, which is variable, which comes with different numbers of protagonists at different points and times of history. Thanks for your attention with this introduction. We will now, before welcoming Mujah Maraini-Melehi on stage, we propose to play a 5-minute clip of the film she recently produced for our exhibition. So it's a 40-minute film that you can also see in the Hamria Studios exhibition space. And just to make a very short introduction, Mujah Maraini-Melehi is a filmmaker herself. We will talk about her filmmaking and her work afterwards. And the first extract that we will see has been produced in Rome a few weeks ago, because I have the chance to be in Rome this year instead of being in Paris for a residency. And we had the chance to come together with her mother, Tony, who again was of the main protagonist. She used to write the manifestos and the main essays of the Casablanca Art School since the early 60s. So let's have a look at this clip, please, and then we will welcome Mujah on stage. Thank you very much.
New York, finalement, vous êtes rentrés tous les deux au Maroc.
En 64. Et on rencontra Farid Belkahia.
Qui était le directeur donc, de l'école de
Melehi
Casablanca.
connaissait déjà et qui était directeur de l'école des Beaux-Arts de Casablanca. Il voulait changer tout, toute la situation d'une école qui avait été une école plutôt coloniale. Changer l'esprit, la pédagogie et aussi l'école de professeurs.
C'était l'inconnu, mais...
C'était l'inconnu et c'était aussi beaucoup de travail. Parce
qu'il n'y avait jamais eu de cours même d'histoire de l'art.
Il n'y avait jamais eu de cours, il fallait tout organiser.
Oui, on te voit là en train de donner justement un des premiers cours.
Parce qu'il fallait commencer par la préhistoire, il fallait commencer par l'Afrique. Les étudiants ne savaient pas grand-chose.
Et réinscrire déjà le Maroc dans l'Afrique déjà.
Absolument. Absolument.
Oui, là, on voit effectivement, on voit que tu leur montres même la géographie de l'Afrique.
On parlait de Sahara quand il était fertile, c'était important pour comprendre l'existence des gravures rupestres similaires d'un côté et de l'autre du Sahara.
D'ailleurs, je crois qu'on a même le plaisir d'avoir justement le polycopier des premiers cours que tu leur as donnés.
Alors, j'ai donné des cours. Comme il n'y avait pas beaucoup de livres en bibliothèque, il n'y avait pas un livre-texte fondamental, j'ai rédigé des chronologies et cours d'histoire de l'art.
Exact.
Je faisais photocopier.
Et qui était déjà sur
le... Ouais. Et je donnais à chaque élève. Donc, ils avaient comme un point de repère.
Je vois que tu leur avais déjà appris qu'est-ce que le Bauhaus.
Oui, parce que les idées pédagogiques du Bauhaus étaient importantes pour nous.
Oui, parce que c'était une école qui avait déjà été expérimentale, disons, dans l'approche. Et...
Oui, n'oublie pas que Dans les années 50, était née une chose qui s'appelait Bauhaus Imaginista, un mouvement pour reprendre les idées du Bauhaus au niveau européen. Et c'était né en Italie.
En Italie. Ça, c'était le manifeste du Bauhaus Imaginista
en Italie.
Qui ouvrait encore plus le spectre du Bauhaus historique sur la Méditerranée.
Donc nous, on s'était beaucoup intéressés à ça.
Donc ça, c'est une des premières brochures de l'école.
C'est la première unique.
Dans laquelle on vous retrouve. Il y a Melehi, il y a toi.
Il n'est pas encore chez Bach, il n'est pas rentré à l'école.
Il est arrivé un peu plus tard.
Il est arrivé un peu plus tard et Attal encore une année plus tard. Ils sont rentrés quand le vieux professeur partait, le poste de vide. Alors on a recommandé à Belkaya nos amis artistes parce qu'on avait des idées en commun.
Donc là, dans cette brochure, je crois qu'on voit même des étudiants, hein, on les voit travailler avec Melehi.
On les voit travailler, si.
On peut les voir justement, parce que Melehi avait amené une approche de la peinture plus radicale aussi. C'était peindre sur le toit de l'école, il y avait des influences,
il y avait un peu tout.
Même du collage, peinture et collage.
Pour les décontracter, oui, il y avait un peu tout. N'oublions pas qu'une génération de jeunes artistes était sortie de l'école, mais surtout ces jeunes femmes qui s'y étaient inscrites. Et parmi elles, il y avait Amina Agueznay, un artiste de grand talent aujourd'hui reconnu.
On retrouve cette fameuse photo de toi en train de donner le premier cours d'histoire de l'art.
Et il y avait aussi un tapis, ça c'est un détail, hein?
C'est un détail.
Le tapis est en couleur.
Qui avait été utilisé pour Maghreb Art. Hein.
On l'appelait l'épaule clé tapis.
Ah, vous avez tout de suite vu le lien de parenté.
Ça semble un tableau de Paul Klee.
Exactement.
Melehi avait pris et avait mis le tapis sur le mur.
Le tapis lui-même, hein?
Le tapis lui-même, l'original. Au lieu d'un vieux modèle de sculpture, d'un buste romain, un plâtre très abîmé.
Oui, le classique buste gréco-romain.
Et les étudiants avaient beaucoup apprécié. C'était une façon de leur faire comprendre que les métiers traditionnels étaient respectables. C'était pas ce que sous le colonialisme, on avait tout mis sous le nom d'art indigène.
Exact.
Et donc, selon l'historien en référence, c'était des arts sans importance, alors qu'en réalité, on découvrait des choses extraordinaires.
Okay. Hello everyone. Thank you, Mujah, for being with us.
Thank you.
So we just had a glimpse to this incredible documentary that people can see entirely in the exhibition. Thank you again for your energy and all the time you took to produce this wonderful document with your mother, Tony, because I also know that Tony is not someone who speaks so easily, but she has a lot to say and she's not so confident.
She writes.
You know?
That's her medium, she writes.
Absolutely, she's a writer and she's still active. We should say that she still writes articles, she's still commissioned by different museums or platforms to write essays. So just first question, very simple, what does it represent to you to be able today to grasp all of your memories and all of your childhood experience, because you were very close, obviously, to everything they did, either in Morocco, in Italy, and elsewhere. You are, in a way, a kid of the Casablanca Art School, but it's with this documentary that suddenly everything becomes synthesized and assembled. So can you just tell us what it represents for you and what was the challenge of assembling this memory?
Well, before we speak about this, about being a kid of the school, the school of Casablanca, I just want to say that I'm sorry that Amina couldn't be here today. She was very sorry she couldn't be with us. Of course, you see her mother, Malika.
Amina Agueznay.
Amina Agueznay, who I was looking forward to talking with her about the process, about being part of the process, and continuing to be part of the process. So, first of all, just a couple of things about this work. This is a conversation, of course, with you. So it's a conversation with Morad and Tony Maraini. It's part of a larger project, part of a feature documentary that I've been working on. So this is just sort of a discussion, a conversation. I'm very glad we took the time to do it while you're in Rome. And so about the process, it's made me think a lot about many memories along the way. I myself am part of the process. My name is Mujah. My name is Wave. And I am told that before I was born, my father was wishing for a daughter because he wanted to call her Mujah, because Mujah, the wave, in fact, in the first images you show in that 1964-65 exhibit, those early works begin to have that curve, the wave. And as my father said to him, the wave was feminine energy. It was sound waves, music. Of course, Azila, his birth town by the sea, so the waves. But it was already part of the seamlessness between the art and the creative and life. And so I'm glad I didn't disappoint. And I was born Wave. Shuf, look, was the first word, I think, that I learned. My father taught me shuf, look, in Arabic. And he would point. And children pick up quickly. So it became a game. Shuf. And what he was teaching me was to look, to identify what I'm looking at, the act of looking, so engaged in what you're looking, the excitement, the wonder, and framing it, right? Later, he would show me how to frame the image through the viewfinder. Through his viewfinder, he was always walking around with a camera. But shuf was the first word.
And it was also the name of a publishing and graphic design studio he created.
So, I was about a year old, and that's when Shuf was created. Shuf, his publishing company. It published Integral. It published artists' works of art, like Shakawi, the book on Shakawi, very important.
They also published a whole series of Moroccan writers like Mustafa Nissabouri,
poetry, my
Abdelatif
mother's
Labi,
poems,
your mother's poems.
Nissabouri. So, and Shuf was written with the English spelling S-H-O-O-F. So, Shuf, you had the eyes, no?
In the two O's, you had the eyes.
The two O's, you had the eyes. And I was very much involved with that because I thought, oh, Shuf, that's my thing, that's our thing, that's our game, that's what we do. So Shuf is 71, right? Yeah. So being part of the process, the seamlessness between life and art in our home. I mean, Integral, the art and literary review was being edited at home, was being done at home. I became very familiar with what it means to be in the process. There was a seamlessness to it. And I realize, of course, now how fortunate I was. In '78, we have actually Shuf publishes the catalog for the first Asila Festival. Right. And I'm part of a project, which actually I was very happy to see here, the mural, my father's mural. The first mural, it was the first mural. And I remember waking up in the morning, excitement, let's go, we're doing this thing by the sanctuary at the end of, the little lovely sanctuary by the sea. I get there, there's already a group of assistants. I watch them clean the wall, prime the wall, trace that mural, and then my father hands me a brush, and I'm allowed to paint.
In Asila?
In Asila. That one that you see, which you see in the catalog, the first of his murals. So, yeah.
And I assume you were among a group of children because
No, not
you were
yet.
alone first?
I was alone, and in fact, I was thinking about this on the way here. I think we did it a little bit before the opening of the festival, because I remember being cold. There is a photograph of me and my father in front of the wall, and I'm wearing a little coat. So it couldn't have been, you know, summer. So I think they were priming the town a little bit before the festival. Of course, what you're saying is my mother's atelier, art atelier. So yes, then I joined naturally because my mother would wake up in the morning, go to you know, the atelier, and I would just join. I was that age. All the kids were my age.
Do you remember more or less the different ateliers? Because I
Yes.
think there was engraving, and,
Yes.
and Tony, your mother, was also involved in most of them, including the children workshop.
Allora, the children's workshops were the first year in the palace. There's a palace in Asila, and that was sort of the headquarters for the artists. In the first year, the artists lived in the palace and worked. That's where their ateliers were. It was a courtyard like this, and the first year we were all over the floor, and you know, we had paper and paint, and then the gardens on the other side of the palace. And in the film you see a lot of photographs of those long tables with all the kids and the paint and everything. So I joined those ateliers, and then there was a group of us, local kids, who are now artists in their own right, but we were a little bit older. And then at one point, we always remember this when we see each other, we asked my mother, we said, you know, we can't be with the little kids. Please, you know, give us another space. So the older kids had a sort of to make us feel. And we were allowed to go see the gravure, the etching atelier. I mean, we had Mohammed Khalil, who was you know, doing all the work for Louise Nevelson. We had Bob Blackburn. Those were the people we were learning from. And soon enough, I learned that we had potters as well. There were all sorts of disciplines. I learned that if I went and just sat in the atelier, they would eventually make me do something. So it was very open to everybody.
And what can you tell us about the duo formed by Tony Maraini and Mohamed Melehi? Because within the whole Casablanca Art School network and hub, their collaboration, which was, of course, a love story, which gave birth to you and your sisters and brothers, but there were also a productive duo. I mean,
my sister.
Your sister.
We are two with from that marriage. Actually, there were two births in '78. There was the Asila Film Festival, not film festival, that's what I'm hoping to create someday now. There was the Asila Festival, and my mother gave birth to my sister. My sister Noor, light, Noor Shams. Again, elements from my father's work, his photography, capturing light. And we were part, again, the seamlessness. The duo, I can tell you a couple of stories. One, I remember when we were living in Casablanca. I don't know if it's about the duo, but it's certainly about the process, and I'll get to it. It was about bedtime, and my mother said, put on your coat over your pajamas and come out to the garden at night. And I put on my pajamas, and I was wondering what was my coat, and I came out, and I find my father with a tripod, the camera pointed up to the moon, and we stand there, and they say, you know, there's a lunar eclipse. The moon is going to change shapes. The sun, the moon, and the earth are aligning. And we're here to witness the wonder and the beauty presence. That's what shuf means you look with presence, right? And then soon after that, I noticed the moon in his work. What my parents were doing that night, they were making me part of the process, right? There's a book that Shuf published of my mother's poetry with the waves and the moon. You speak, in the conversation, you talk about her cosmology, right? That they had created this thing. Well, I witnessed it, but because they wanted me to understand the process, I think. And then the second story is in 84, I think it was in 84. The moon was in 81, I remember that. My father was preparing this exhibit for the Bronx Museum.
1984.
84. And there was this big exhibit at MoMA, but anyway, they always took me to the museum. So we were living in Tangier at the time. We went to New York to see this exhibit. And at the MoMA, I'm this, you know, like any teenager, kind of being cocky. And I'm with my mother, and there's a Picasso. And I say, I could have done that. And she calmly just looks at me and says, yes, but you didn't, and it's here at the MoMA. So that was one. A second one, the second lesson, always, again, very spontaneously, very easy, no lesson, just a game. Shuf is a game. My mother says the most important thing in art history, you look at the date. She said, go look at the date. Must have been in the 20s. And she said, you see, you need to understand the context of the whole thing. What was there before, the bigger picture. So the duo, coming back to the duo, which was the wonderful thing that I get from the duo, is that my father taught me to see, to feel, to sort of have a sense of what I'm taking in, frame it with my eyes. My mother taught me how to frame it in a historical context, give it the bigger story. And I think that's what they did with each other, with the work they did at the Casablanca Art School, with the work with Présence Plastique, with Integral, with Souffle before that. It was all about research. And I think that's why it worked so well, because art and life were one.
I mean, it's fascinating because I'm very compelled by the idea that eventually the essence of their collaboration was this idea of a cosmogonic modernity, even a cosmogonic abstraction, which defies the, let's say, the classic binary of figurative and abstract in Western art, and the way Melehi produced kinds of abstract landscape or almost abstract landscape was obviously also the result of everything that he photographed, because some of these symbols and patterns can be retraced within the most microscopic pattern of a small Amazigh jewel or rug. And Tony, your mother, was the one to study them, to analyze them.
That's right. But remember, she's the daughter of an anthropologist, Fosco Maraini.
We should have talked about this because it's important to remind the family background of Tony Maraini. If you can do it in a...
We could be here for another.
But this one, I'm sure you can do it in briefly, I mean.
Well, I am here thanks to my grandmother, her mother, Topazia Agliata, who owned a gallery in Rome, Galleria Trastevere, in the 50s. Actually, did you see that article clipping that I sent you just 2 days ago? I found this article from the 60s, from the Daily American in Rome, and it had a picture of my grandmother Topazia moving one of my father's works at 1960. And it said, the title was that it was commissioned for a British magazine about figures who lead the dance in Rome. So she was one of those people who sort of was a little bit everywhere. She was very good friends with Francis McCann, who had the Rome New York Foundation, another gathering of artists. and intellectuals, and she was friends with Peggy Guggenheim. You know, she was a key player in the world of art at that time, post-war Rome, Italy. So she notices, actually a friend of hers who's a professor of my father's 20 years old, 2021. And he's studying at the art school in Rome. And this professor, Toti Shaloya, who was very good friends with my grandmother, said, you should really look at the work of this young Moroccan artist, because I think he's a promising artist. And my grandmother was known for showing international artists. That was the
but including non-Western.
Non-Western, absolutely.
As early as the 50s in Rome.
Takahashi, exactly. There was Vasily, no?
The Iranian artist, Vasily Moradin.
There were so many artists who weren't, right, the Western, there were also the, Manzoni and Fontana, but Toti Shaloya thought she should look at my father's work. So in a way that launched him. She gave him, he was the youngest artist to have a solo show in Rome.
In your grandmother's gallery?
In my grandmother's gallery at
Topazzi
21.
Aliata.
At Topazzi Aliata. So that's one.
We should also mention, so you said that your grandfather, Fosco Maraini, was a great anthropologist, was a creative anthropologist, because he not only studied an ethnographic study of Tibetan context, but for example, he wrote a book about clouds for an anthropologist, very poetic and very creative.
He wrote poetry, he was a photographer. He photographed Tibet in 1937. Most of what he photographed no longer exists, so the idea that you document what you see.
And he was not strictly Italian. He had origins.
He had my great grandmother was English. Do you know that his parents met thanks to Bernard Berenson? You know, the art historian. Bernard Berenson introduced my great grandmother to my great grandfather Antonio. Now I know this is getting complicated, but he's worth mentioning. Antonio Maraini, my mother's grandfather.
Who was Antonio Maraini, who was also the director of the Venice Biennale?
He was yes.
During the 30s?
The 20s and 30s. He was responsible for a lot of the Venice Biennale's sort of progress, and co-founded the Venice Film Festival, yes, in the 30s.
Thank you very much, Mujah. I'm wondering if it's about time we show the second clip, if it's ready, which is a short clip.
I just would like to add just one quick thing. It's interesting to just make that connection. You were mentioning, well, the Paul Klee rug, right? Paul Klee and Kandinsky. And he had exhibited, or he had organized a big exhibit. Do you know what year? Maybe you know it better.
We're talking about Venice Biennale in the 30s?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know the exact year, but probably 30s.
Kandinsky and Paul Klee. And just to say that when my mother went to high school, went to study in Florence, she lived with him. So she absorbed a lot of that, of the way, of his own creativity. He was a sculptor. So I just wanted to add that.
If we have the chance to look at the second clip, I think it deals with the field work and the way Tony and Melehi were also working on the field to find all these arts and craft and to photograph them and to study them, including Bert Flint, of course.
Donc ça veut dire que quand tu préparais les cours d'histoire de l'art à l'école, il y avait tout ce savoir que vous avez constitué avec Melehi que tu accompagnais, qui allait photographier ces bijoux, ces tapis.
C'est un sacré travail.
Là, vous avez beaucoup voyagé.
Tous les documents que tu trouves depuis 10 ans dans des magasins, des livres, etc., ça vient de l'archive de photos, de tout ce que Melehi avait. Regarde, ces photos magnifiques.
Elles sont incroyables.
Cette zaouïa du Sud n'existe plus.
Mais justement, vous, comment ça se passait? Vous alliez en voiture, comme ça, spontanément comment vous faisiez
alors là, il y a un autre détail. On avait connu Bert Flint, qui on avait lié amitié, et qui
était aussi un grand amateur, collectionneur d'art populaire.
Oui. D'abord, il était quelqu'un sur le terrain qui était intéressé à voir. Donc, il nous avait indiqué des endroits.
OK.
Parfois, on a voyagé avec lui. D'autres fois, on a voyagé par notre compte.
Parfois même avec les étudiants, non?
À la fin aussi avec les étudiants. Parfois seul, surtout dans le nord du Maroc, on a voyagé seul. Mais dans le sud et dans la haute Atlas, on laissait la voiture, on marchait à pied.
D'accord.
Parfois à dos de mulet. Là, on est en plein dans le haute Atlas. Et on va à pied vers un endroit.
OK.
Et ce qui m'intéressait, c'est de montrer que lui, il avait toujours son appareil photographique.
Il y a aussi le fameux voyage que vous avez fait en 1965, lorsque Melehi et toi, vous avez accueilli au Maroc ta sœur Dasha et aussi Alberto Moravia et Pier Paolo Pasolini.
Ils avaient été très inspirés par ces voyages, surtout Pasolini.
Mais en tout cas, il préparait ce film.
Quand il a vu ce paysage, il a dit, c'est ça.
D'accord. Pour le film Oedipe Roi.
So I'm happy that we could have a glimpse of the film together. I'm so thankful to Mujah for her talk. So I will also mention the fact that we are happy to welcome another daughter of Mohamed Melehi, who is Lulua Melehi, with us today, the daughter of Mrs. Faten Safieddin and Mohamed Melehi. So obviously she's also welcome to say a word, or she can also reply to your questions even after. But now we have 8 minutes if you want to ask any question to Mujah, especially. You are free to ask questions. We can open the floor for a short Q&A if there is any question. I know that maybe this wide context make it a bit complicated, but I see someone over there.
Yeah. Thank you. Mujah, thank you very, very much for your beautiful film. Can you please explain, you have more documentary and more information about Bauhaus and the impact of Bauhaus on this period of the time in Casablanca, in School of Art of Casablanca, and the connection between Bauhaus and them, and the impact of them?
So the connection, I think it was a very easy process, as my mother mentions, that they were interested in Bauhaus because, should I wait? Okay. Because there was a similarity, no? The need to explain to the students, well, first of all, to teach Bauhaus, to talk about what Bauhaus was, but also to give importance to folk arts, to traditional arts, to not look at them as something separate, right? Something of less value. I think that they really wanted to make it, to empower this new generation of young artists to think of what they have around them as something that inspired others, that may have inspired Paul Klee, in fact. It may have. And they actually, I don't know if you noticed the photograph of Herbert Bayer. Herbert Bayer was staying in Tangier. I think he spent a lot of time in Tangier, and as soon as they found out, they of course wanted to meet him and expand the conversation. Now, of course, Herbert Bayer was in Morocco and inspired by Moroccan colors and by Moroccan art. In his art,
there are a few lithographs of Herbert Bayer in the exhibition in Hamaria Studios to make the connection between Melehi and Bayer. Yeah.
Right. That meeting, that photograph you see, there's an interview that was actually published in Integral, the last issue, the last issue of Integral.
Excuse me, just because I'm a little bit confused because of the fact that you mentioned in the film or generally in the exhibition is a post-colonialism movement in School of Art of Casablanca to go a new way of contemplation of art and implementing a lot of local and national symbols in the art and going on with that. And then going back to Bauhaus, if I don't make a mistake, it was Corbusier or somebody in that magnitude who planned a city in North Africa without to ask the North African whether he's allowed to plan and design this type of architecture. I don't want to say imperialism architecture, but colonialism architecture to bring it to North Africa and say this is the city that you should live inside. And then going back in...
What year was that? Do you know?
I think it was post-war Bauhaus movement. But anyway, what I wanted just to understand, was it not in a conflict with the fact that they wanted to get rid of the colonialism and then getting back to Bauhaus and bring Bauhaus to that point?
That would have been like throwing the baby with the baby water.
Exactly.
And I don't think they wanted to do that. I think they wanted to engage students and people in that conversation. And I think that they wanted it to be clear that there was always a dialogue between the global north and the global south.
So I think it's important to say that the Bauhaus was maybe German originally as a point of departure, but the legacy of the Bauhaus, the development of the Bauhaus, the circulation of Bauhaus ideas worldwide was certainly not German. It was made of students coming from India, from Japan, from North Africa. We don't know a lot about it, but now we know more because we should praise a very important German curator whose name was Marion van Osten, rest in peace, who created an incredible project at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt in Berlin, showing that foreignness of Bauhaus, that actually Bauhaus was made by foreigners and their ideas circulated by non-Western protagonists. So it's very important. We tend to look at it as a German thing, but it's actually all made out of foreign people who contributed either in Germany or in the US or coming back to their own countries from India to Morocco. So there is nothing integrally German, let's say. It was definitely a transnational and hybrid movement in a way, as even originally. Not to mention the fact that they all exiled from the Germany to the United States, and that general exile also generated other transnationalism and non-Western echoes. We have 2 minutes left if there are more questions.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the experience of the film in the exhibition itself, which was just really wonderful for an exhibition that's so kind of document heavy, to have the experience of sifting through the documents in dialogue with your mother was just a very special. It was one of those when you walk into a film and you think you're going to spend a couple of minutes and you realize that you can't leave because it was so important. I wanted to ask you, you spoke so generously about your childhood in terms of your parents and the different kind of lessons they taught you about looking and engaging with art. When it comes to the roles that your parents played in the Palestine liberation movement in terms of the 1978 exhibition in Beirut, with your mother writing the essay that was not published in the catalogue, and then your father's amazing designs that came into the posters as well as artworks in the exhibition, Can you speak to that in terms of the childhood? You know, in terms, I don't know how old you were at that time and like what that meant for you.
In 78, I was about 8 years old, but I can't really speak to that. No, I am sorry.
Okay, thank you.
We have 20 seconds left. If someone wants to ask a very quick question, which will get a very quick reply, but the nice thing is that we can continue the conversation with Mujah, of course, after this panel, just wandering around.
What inspires you, and what opportunities do you see art helping this generation and generations to come create change within society?
Wow, that's a huge question. I think that what my parents taught me is that art creates change just by starting a dialogue, that it can be art activism, but on different terms. I don't know how to say. I mean, it's interesting that you should ask this after the question about that you just asked, that I can't really go into. But I think they taught me that certainly with the experiment, I call it an experiment with Asila, I witnessed the transformation of a town and of the people as well, by bringing art and, you know, making art democratic, available to everybody. Everybody could join in. Everybody, it made, you know, it's just such a huge conversation that we could have, and I see 0 seconds, 0 minutes and 0 seconds. So I'm sorry, maybe we can continue talking about this. But certainly it always gave me hope, and that art is about presence and about, it's activism, but it's also about gentle activism. Can I say that?
And physical presence.
Absolutely physical presence, but yes.
Thank you very much.